Welcome, everyone. We are here for another episode of Healing is War. On this podcast, we explore the shadows of your healing or your spiritual journey, where we may uncover some different things. Today is all about hidden in your family tree. I was having a conversation with Verlyn. This is Verlyn Tarlton, everyone. And she was talking about what she discovered in her family tree. I was like, well, let's come on and talk about it because your story can assist other people. So, up front, welcome. Thank you for coming. First of all, tell us, what does family mean to you, first of all?
Good question. And first of all, thank you, Elmira, for having me. And I just want to put this out there. These questions have not been rehearsed. So it's not like I had a chance to write up anything. What does family? The first thing that comes to my mind or I think about is legacy and legacy and being able to pass down a legacy of love, a legacy of pride, a legacy of, well, love and being together. Like that's what comes to my mind. Legacy, love, passing something down to a next generation, and people you can rely on and be together with.
And you definitely emulate that. I mean, you're always talking about marriage and how we need to get back to solid marriages. And it's demonstrative of everything you're saying, this togetherness, legacy, because how are you going to build legacy if you don't have that strong foundation?
Mhm.
What have you found in your lifetime specifically about this togetherness? What are some people missing? And maybe it's something hidden in their family tree. I don't know. What are people, what's going on with the folks? Because you have them on your podcast too. You talk to a lot of people.
What I see is missing is connection. I think it's because of the times that we're in. I can see a difference today just from when I was young, 30, 40, 50 years ago, that we don't have the connection we have anymore. We don't have the accountability in terms of community, our collective and culture. That's missing. We have become disconnected and have the mindset of an individual, me and mine, versus back in the day, when you went outside in your neighborhood. First of all, everybody knew each other. And like when I lived with my mom and my grandfather, the neighbors around were the same grandparents that were there when my mother was in high school. And so that those were like families because they were a generation or two that were in that same neighborhood. And we didn't live so far away from my aunts. And, I did have an uncle that lived, in Virginia Beach. We were native Washingtonians, as in the District of Columbia. I had another uncle that eventually moved to Florida, but most of us were right in the DMV. And
Mhm.
so, we saw each other more than we do now. And our neighborhood was like a family because these are all people that had been in these homes for 50 and 60 years. And so there was a community accountability. There was a code of ethics that we had that are missing today. And one quick example, when you went outside, I just did like a brief podcast about this. When you went outside, you knew that your neighborhood, like so and so's grandmother, so and so's grandpa was on the front porch or whatever, like they were looking at how you conducted yourself. And if you did something stupid, you know, so and so would call you out. Tina's grandma would say, "Bro, what are you doing?" And you knew that there was an accountability that, okay, I better get myself together so she won't tell my mother. or my grandfather, and we knew we could play safely outside. We were playing in DC streets, and so when cars came, we moved out of the way. When they passed by, we went back and we threw the football. We played kickball or dodgeball. And so that sense of community has been lost, in my opinion. It may go on some places,
Mm-hmm.
but it's lost. Myself, for an example, I live in Virginia, but I don't live close to my mom like before. I mean, I can jump in the car and be to her house in about an hour, 20 minutes, right? Whereas before we were all like probably within a 30-minute ride from each other. And so again, the connectedness, and I'm not talking about just holidays. I'm saying just the regular everyday connectedness is missing along with the accountability. Because when you were accountable or you were held to a standard, unlike today, you carried yourself a certain way in the streets. And so, you know, that accountability, again, the community, the collective, we don't think that way. We think me, mine, instead of us, ours, and we. And so, unfortunately, that's missing. And of course, the whole broken home thing. I mean, they've always existed, but we don't wear, back then, we didn't wear being a single mother, a single young mother as a badge of honor. you know um Nobody was looking at you saying you, but we didn't wear that as a badge of honor because family was valued more. Again, that's my opinion. I try to state things in opinion and not necessarily facts, but yeah, I saw so many couples coming up. Even though my parents were married and separated, I saw community. I saw grandparents that had been together forever. I saw their children, my mom's friends in my church I grew up in, like couples everywhere. That was the thing to, again, family, legacy. I saw people get married and stay married and still are married to this day. And that's not something that is as prevalent as it was 30, 35 years ago.
Yeah. What do you think has shifted? Because I've had a similar upbringing as you. Growing up in Virginia, I lived with my grandmother. My great aunts were next door, another great aunt right there, another great aunt and uncle. Baptist church was literally down the lane. Like I lived next door to the church. What has changed, and would you say some of this change has been associated with us not knowing our true history? Because you made some discoveries yourself.
I think what's changed a lot is money. I
Mm,
think having more access, not that I'm against it, I'm about the money. What I'm saying is, at one point, money wasn't the focus. We weren't focused on getting a $500,000 home. We weren't focused on getting Lexus and Mercedes. We were more family oriented. And so you had two people working together to make sure the family was provided for your basic necessities. You had a home, you had transportation, you had food, all of these things. But then there came a time, well, this is probably going back, you had the 60s where, or the 70s where uh lots of the jobs that were in the inner cities, where our people could work and be in a factory, they were moved and pushed out to the suburbs. And so if you didn't have transportation or subway, those jobs were lost. Therefore, the men were pulled out of the home. And then you had the influx of drugs, and that's another story. And so you have all these things that you're seeing the results later on, how that family structure was slowly dismantled to a certain degree. You still had families, like I said, that I saw, but there was still a residue that carried over. And so then when you get, okay, we can move, we can get these jobs back. We can do this. And so now the regular jobs that you couldn't have before and a regular home next to grandma, like you said, where your aunts live, you can now move out of the neighborhood. You can move to somewhere more affluent, because all these laws were passed. And so instead of the focus being on the family and keeping our children safe and keeping a roof over their head, it began, let's get out of, the hood. Let's get bigger and better and let's work more hours so we can get more stuff. And so to me, that's when the shift happened, the whole era of just having more stuff and having more money to buy stuff, which means you had to work more hours to get the money to get the stuff. And so then that's when the disconnection came. That's how I see it, because it moved from family being priority to now, you know what? We can get more stuff and we can get more in debt. And with the debt came more working hours. And so then our children are, in a sense, left unprotected, And so, yeah, I think it shifted from family to stuff and being or having the illusion of being affluent, because now we can get this and we can get that. And there's a level of validation, I suppose, that comes with that. With my family in particular, I did not know my true culture because, I was watching TV. And so when a people don't have their culture or collective, right, and a community, you just kind of go with the flow. And that's why all this need for validation from other cultures come in, because we're not really understanding or clear on who we are, and that, our culture is family, not trying to assimilate and achieve status so we can have stuff.
You're right, because if we look back, let's go back, let's just have a point of reference. Let's go back to the 1300s. Here and we know this, me and you both, roots in Virginia. What was happening in the 1300s with our people? We had a community, we had a family, we were farming, we were doing all this stuff before anybody came over, whether it was Columbus or whoever. That's what we were doing. And we can see that to this day, even with the disconnection, we have family reunions, which prove that that's our root. We have Sunday dinners. That's our root. What did you specifically discover about, because you were saying you looked at TV, or we collectively look at TV for our culture, and we're missing that. And it's looking at TV makes us get into the sense of validation. What did you discover about like your family history, your roots specifically, that caused you to not seek validation?
All right, so let me see if I can make this long story even longer. Just kidding. Okay, so here's the thing. Growing up in the district, that's what we call DC, there was always, well, first of all, there was the assumption just by going to school that we were Black people, right? Nobody had to say, who are you? You looked at your skin tone and you sound Black, right? And so that was that, you know? Um, my father, like I said, my parents were married but separated when I was very young, probably four, a little before I turned five. And so when I started school at five, I was Black, right? That was all I knew. As I got a little older, I remember when I would see my father on occasion, I remember him saying just like things like, we've got Indian in our family. I remember my mother saying, we've got Indian in our family. And in DC, that was the running joke. Like, seriously, everybody, when you said that, yeah, yeah, we know everybody got Indian in their family, because you would hear other children say that. Yeah, my grandmother said, I got Indian in my blood. Or somebody would say, I got Indian in my family. And so it was a running joke. Like, that was a joke. I don't even know why, but it was. And so anytime you wanted to be funny, you would say something like that. And so, again, I heard my parents say these things. And as I got a little older, my father started talking to me a little more. He was like, we have family in Delaware, and they're Indians. And I was like, okay, cool, but it did not, in my mind, because of TV and the verbal teaching that, all black people came from Africa. In my mind, I was like, okay, I'm from Africa. And the Indian thing, again, that was a joke. That was a running joke. And so I remember I was a teenager and I don't even know why I was having this conversation. And I said something to my mother, would you ever want to go back to Africa or visit Africa? My mother's like, we are not from Africa. We are not Africans. And I'm like, why do you want to deny your heritage? Because it was so ingrained. I never watched Roots, but I do remember being in, I don't know if I was in elementary or early middle school, but like that was the show. Like everybody came back to school talking about Roots. I never watched Roots because even at a young age, I hated racism. I would be the one to get mad when I saw stuff like that and internalize it. So I knew I couldn't watch it because it came on like a mini series. And so when I just heard it was about slavery, I was like, no, I won't be watching that.
Not even
Every
trying.
movie, no, I didn't watch Roots. I didn't watch Mississippi Burning. I didn't watch 12 Years a Slave. I didn't watch The Help. Nothing where we looked like we were being oppressed, either running from slavery, in slavery, or running to slavery. I didn't watch it to this day. And so, but I heard enough about it. And because there was a book written by that author, who later was found out that that whole thing, there was a couple of lawsuits going on because of plagiarism, but I'm not going to get into that. So anyway, I had the mindset of Africa. My mother was like, no, we got Indian. My father was like, definitely, we are nanny coat. That didn't mean anything to me as a younger person. I was just, oh, okay, we got some Indian blood in us. And so, long story short, I think I was about 20, and my father decided to take me down to see my family that I had never met in all these years because, like I said, my father didn't raise me. And so I met lots of people in Delaware, family, aunts and uncles, and great this and great that. And they all had hundreds of acres here, and another one lived here and had hundreds of acres. There was a museum my father took me to that's actually called the Nanticoke Museum, where they were able to pull up records of my ancestor descendants. And it was just a lot, on that weekend that I learned. And I was like, oh, wow, like this is for real. And I still didn't get it still didn't hit me like it should have. But what I said was, oh, I got proof. Like we really are, we're real Indians, like some of the family members, they were dressed in a different kind of regalia. Like they didn't have feathers, but they wore things that looked more of that custom, not necessarily. They would have on jeans and the Indian regalia. I can't really describe it, like beads and things like that. They didn't have feathers, but it was like they were real serious about it. And they did things. I happened to go like on a heritage day where they did what you would call, I guess, a powwow, things like that. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is for real. Like, yeah, I really got some Indian. It was still coming to me some Indian. And then my mom, again, she was like, yeah, we got Cherokee and some other, I forgot. She couldn't remember, and so I can't even say. But she said two tribes, which was Cherokee and something else.
Now,
And
where's your mom's family from, Verlyn? What area?
um, a couple of generations would be Tennessee, and then they migrated to West Virginia, and then to DC. I was born in Washington, DC. My father, his family for generations were in Delaware, and then his mom, his grandmother, my great grandmother migrated to DC as well. So my parents met in DC, even though they're not native Washingtonians. And so, well, yeah, my father was. He was born here. My mom was born in West Virginia. And so I didn't understand it fully, but I understood it a lot more than when I was a child. And so, um, and then I would have conversations. He passed away about 4 years ago. And that's when he was telling me, like, yeah, we're real Indians, there's no African descent, things like that. And I was like, wow. And then about maybe 6, 7 years ago, I took my current children that are still with me, we went to the museum and I was explaining to them, this is our heritage, etc. And then we went back about 2 years ago as my children were older, and I was trying to explain to them, like, this is the real deal. It's not like what we see on TV. And I would ask some of my oldest relatives that were still alive, do we have any history? Like, is there any oral history from Africa? And they were like, no. As a matter of fact, I did a survey of like 10 people that I met that were like 69, 70 and up. And they told me when they came up in elementary, middle, and high school, there was no teaching about slavery. Like that was not a thing. Roots was not a thing. None of that was a thing. And so just, I guess about 2 years ago, I was like, you know what, I'm going to delve into this a little more. I really want to have a little more accuracy. And so I joined ancestor.com. The one
Hmm.
thing my father always told me, it doesn't matter how illegal, how wrong, or whatever, there's always documents. People write everything down. And so I was like, let me go and see what I can find. And so what I did, I went back and I started looking up birth certificates and military records and mainly census. That was the
Mm.
thing. My maternal grandfather had a farm. He sold it before he passed. He had acres of farmland. And I verified so many things before I found it from my oldest aunt who's still alive, who told me, yeah, we're this Indian. She told me we had an Irish great grandmother and they came over on boats, you know? And so when I went and searched records, I found out, yeah, our history, we have farm history. I could not find any slave documentation. And I brought this. I made sure I have this. This is my file. I
Mm.
didn't do any blood swapping and slobbing, but I went back
You got
and
the
I found
papers.
records. Yeah, I did. I found documentation and mainly census. And just like my aunt told me, our history is farm. I found documentation that literally has white slave female, white slave free, white slave male, white, and then black or Negro. And so not only have we, in my opinion, been duped about this whole thing, slavery, there's there are no real records that you can find that speak to this. And so when I started doing this research, I went back to like the late 1600s and I found these things that showed that my family were free, right? They were farmers, just like my aunt told me. And I told my aunt, or I asked her, was anybody in the military? She's like, this person, that person. My mother, same thing. Well, I found those records. I found some of the military records. And what I learned from the census is they did not have what we have, which is, they get these census people with the badge, they come to your home, whatever. The US or the marshals would take the census. And what they were supposed to do is just look at a person and say, oh, okay, you're this, you're that. Um, and because of the colonialism that happened, there was some mixing. And so if you look light skinned, they called you mulatto instead of Indian. And then I have one relative, maybe two, but one relative specifically. One census long, long ago had I for Indian. The next one had something like C for color. And the next one had Negro. Like we were what you call whited out. And it's right there. That one relative went from Indian to black within like a 40, 50-year span, according to the census, right? And so I had people in my family that were pharmacists, mainly farmers. There's no record or documentation to substantiate that anybody on any side, except for one, like long, long, I think was 17. And it wasn't even the way I read the write-up, because it's all in that cursive,
Mm-hmm.
way back then. It's not like it's typed up. He was enslaved or he was an indentured servant. And some kind of way he got some money and he purchased his freedom, and he had a weapon, and he purchased his wife. And if something happened and somebody said, "This is my weapon," right? It was a gun. And he went to court. All this is like
Oh
documented. And
my.
he went to court and he got his weapon back. And so some of the things that we've been told, I'm not going to say they're all lies, but everything isn't accurate. I know this, you can't see this, but this is an old piece of paper. And
I
they
can
have little
see the names or something off to the left and then the columns.
Yeah, so in highlight, what it is one of my ancestors, and he's under free where it says black, right? And then on the other column, it has ticks where it says white, and they were enslaved, and some of them were free. And so it's just a lot of history that's out there. If you can take the time to dig stuff up, and you can see, just like my father said, there are lots of documents, even when they were doing stuff that was cruddy, they documented. And so, with that in mind, I say, well, where are all these slave ships? Like, you're
I'm
talking about
wondering
12
too.
million Africans came over here, and it's the way this country likes to make money. Where are the slave ships so we can go see them and pay money? Like, you know what I'm saying?
At the
Like,
Smithsonian right there in DC.
right. Like, where, I mean, I think there is some legit documentation about the whole Jamestown, Virginia. I think there's something like 20 or 30, but millions, you got to really rethink that. And even I remember seeing these pictures in books and online where you have all these quote unquote Africans chained down at the bottom of a boat, and they're layered like that, a layer here and another little layer here. And all the time it would have taken to get all the way transatlantic to here, how did they survive? How would they have been pooping, peeing, not eating? How would they have survived weeks? We're not talking about a cruise ship where, it takes a couple of days to get
And
from
you
one
know
place
how
to
the
another.
Atlantic Ocean is. That's torrential. It's not no,
It
oh,
wasn't
we
even possible back then. That's what people who are much smarter than I said, right? And so as I began to do more research and listening to people who have been going around all over the place, pulling up documents that I probably would never be able to reach. Um, it's just occurred to me that we're not all who we think we are. We think that we're all these Africans and not. And so, I mean, I went back, I found some people that did come overseas, like I said,
hmm.
from Ireland, and I'm compiling this to leave to my children. I have one from I don't know this is my mother. Yeah, one from my mother's side, one from my family side. I mean, my father's side. And that's what I'm doing because I want to leave this so my children can get a better sense of who they are. And so, that's where I am because how can you understand who you are if you don't know where you've come from? And I'm not saying that this is everybody's story, but what I'm saying is this: a lot of us who think we're from Africa and from slavery, if you actually do your due diligence, I'm not talking about swabbing stuff because I don't even know how they can take your secretions and match them all the way across the water. That's another story. I'm not even going to get into that. But what I am saying, if you can find census records, military records, and anything like that, marriage records, birth certificates, you can find out who you really are and where you're really from instead of just this egregious story that we have passed down from generation to generation. And I ain't hating on Africa or Africans. I'm just saying that we all are not that. But that's what we were told. And so we continue to perpetuate this. And so we don't know some of our customs. We don't know some of our culture because we're told, well, first of all, we're here and this land was taken over and stolen. So, a lot of what we believe is not, absolutely not our culture.
Yeah, you said a lot. But what you're letting people know is it's in the oral tradition. What did you hear from your mother, your father, your grandmother, your grand? Because I know personally, like my mom specifically didn't talk about stuff, but my dad did because
Mhm.
my grandparents' family is from North Carolina. They're Cherokee. And my grandmother, if you saw a picture of my grandmother, Cora White Lofton, she looked like an Indian, an indigenous person, like just in her look. And I'll tell you about my other grandmother, who I'm named after, Elmira. She was in, of course, in Virginia, right outside of Richmond, in a place called New Kent, which is in between, you probably know where it is. It's in between Williamsburg and Richmond.
Okay.
That grandmother, ever since I known her, I met her in 1983. I was 5 because we went to live with her when my grandfather died, her husband. She always had, like how this is, and y'all, this is faux hair, but how this hair is, she had long gray. I mean, it went to about mid back. She would keep it braided. That was my grandmother Elmira. So when you start looking in that you start thinking about the customs and what was done. I never thought I was African. I didn't identify with it. It just
Hmm.
didn't, it ain't set well with me. And you know
Hmm.
something about your name? I don't know. I'm picking up on it as I'm talking. I never thought about it until you said verify. So Verlyn means verify truth. You are intended to find these truths in the documents, build this legacy to pass down. Like you said, you're going to hand that down to your children. And what I see is what we were talking about in the beginning, the reason why we have this disconnection, people searching for the validation. We don't know who we are. So
Mhm.
when you don't know who you are, you want to go get a bigger house. I need to go get my Benz. I need to whatever. I can say that happened to me because I didn't fully know who I am till maybe 10 years ago or something. I always was researching history, roots, culture, all of that stuff. And what you're speaking about with roots, that happened in my generation. I was in school in the 80s. That's all they taught us was some slavery. But I knew that wasn't right. And so when I went to college at Virginia Tech, I studied Black studies. And that's what opened my eyes to what's really going on with United States Black people, with international Black people. Yeah, it was a lot. It's like,
Elmira, I have
what?
to say this because I have to speak to something you said that is so key and it's
What?
still going on today. We will choose as a people to believe what they say versus what our own people say. Oral tradition. That is so key. I didn't realize that as a young person or even as a young woman. I didn't think about that until maybe my early 40s, late 30s. I was being told by my parents these things, but they didn't say that in school. Jesse, well, people came up with these African American misnomers, all of these things. And so we are, in a way, because of school, programmed to consider what outsiders say to us versus what our own people tell us through oral tradition. Why? Because it was not written in a textbook or put in a movie. And so we will ignore our own people and the oral tradition they are explaining because maybe they can't explain everything exactly, right? My father more so could, but not my mom. And we will take on what outsiders tell us because they said it and they put it in a textbook and then they seared it by putting it in a movie because that's what we are. We visualize things. And so that's so important. Y'all better listen to Big Mama and them, what your grandpa said, and your great
Yeah.
your older aunts. They know the truth. They had tradition passed down. We lost that. We lost the oral tradition. So you got to prove it to me. You got to put it in a book. I got to Google it. That's where we are now. You got to Google everything. And so that oral tradition is so important. And I wish I had known and understood this earlier so that my adult children now that are out of my house and living their own lives, I wasn't, I mean, I passed it down, but it wasn't the same as what I'm doing to these three. And I wish I had known, I wish I had listened. And so I would have passed that down in a much stronger way. And even proof, the proof has been there all along. We just didn't know it.
Yeah, because it's teaching us because that's our culture. Our culture is, think about it. What do we do as people? We dance, we sing, we do all this stuff. You might go to church on Sunday. That's all oral. It's all coming from the voice. We don't need to do all this. It's about the feeling. We're very spiritual people. We're very community oriented people,
Mhm,
family people, and that comes from the mouth.
mhm,
Even this platform that we're doing now, where people have created this thing called the podcast, this is us. Like we did podcasts back in the day. If you really think about it, sitting around at the house or whatever, that's what we did. We
mhm,
now it's been monetized into
yeah,
something. But let me tell you, Verlin, I remember as a little girl, we used to call them round table discussions. We would have it
mhm.
at my table, at the table at home. My
What
mom
about
would be to work.
fireside chats?
Yes,
Fireside chats.
the same thing. We do this. Like, because what do we do when we get together? It might be a cookout, family reunion. It don't matter what it is. We having a serious conversation. I'm talking, the men might be talking about this, the women talking about this. You solving problems through the voice.
Mhm,
And nobody need no paper to be like, oh, Verlyn signed the contract so you can approve what you said. Or if it's, let's say, because Mother's Day is coming up too. I'm just telling you what goes on in my family. I won't be there in Virginia, but one of my
mhm,
sisters, she's always like, well, what are we doing? She's organizing the food. Who's going to bring the vegetables? Who's going to bring the, but that comes from the tradition of
mhm.
speaking.
Right. Yep.
Why do you think, because you mentioned it, but I also want to ask this question explicitly. Why do you think we started to believe them instead of us?
School. I mean, it was the place that you went to do what? Learn, right? You went to school to learn. And so there was a trust that whatever the teacher was telling you, whatever was in a book, that was true. Because that the oral connection did not exist much in the 70s and the 80s, other than, maybe going to church or if you were in some type of civic organization. But for me, and I'm an only child, and so it could look different because of that. We didn't sit around talking about stuff. We celebrated holidays and things like that, and we had fun, but there was no talking about where we came from. There was no discussion on community ethics. There was no discussion on um, background. It was just like it was passed from them on to us that we're Black people and, this is what we do. And then you went to school, and for most of us, that's where we got our identity from. Again, they put it in a book and said, this is who you are. And unless you had a parent who was very intentional about saying, well, they might be telling you this, but this isn't true. Let me sit you down and say that. And that, in a sense, is what my father did when I was old enough to, understand things and people. And like I said, too, that was the running joke. Oh, yeah, we all got Indian in us, not understanding that it was actually true, right? It
Because
was
you
actually
know what
true.
it, you know, one of those things, because that's our culture too. We like to joke about the stuff that's true.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
think about it. Well, you may not have known about this, but there was a time, mainly like in the 80s and 90s, where them yo mama jokes were
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
popular. You know,
Mhm.
so you
Yep.
might say something, your mama is so big, she
Right.
Your mama was big, but he was exaggerating it and saying she was so big that
Right.
she da 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 da. The same is true because if we're joking about being Indian, there's an element of truth to that. We knew it. We innately knew it, but then we allowed the education system to tell us that we weren't.
That was purposely. I explained to you how how the census record of one relative was changed. You can see all this stuff has been intentional and without trying to get all deep about it because it's not like I'm an expert, but it all ties to the whole thing about the land grab, right? This is stolen land that we're on. And it's not stolen from, what from this handful of people that were Indians. It's these many because no, we didn't all come over here on ships. We were already here. Some of us were captured and taken to South America and other places, but it's not like what we thought. And so, even though my mother said those things and she knew we were not from Africa and she said that, it wasn't a great concentration on who you actually were. Like I said, my father had more of a keen sense of the value in it and making sure I understood it and then taking me to see my relatives. But that was not what was going on for whatever reason. And why we choose to believe lies, because they're so perpetuated. They're perpetuated everywhere you go. I heard it in church. Oh, we're African, blah, blah, blah. Then you hear it in school, then you see it on TV. And so when you hear enough of a lie, unless you got some real strong, intuitiveness going on, you will believe that. And even the whole thing with church, I'm not against churches or anything like that. And I'm a very spiritual person. But I read something, um, and it said it was talking about the different cultures between true Indians and Western. And it said something to the effect of in the Western culture, they go to church to hear a man talk about God. But in our culture, we go outside in nature and we listen for the voice. And I was like, wow, I never thought about that. Again, it's
That was
conditioning
right.
and programming, you know. We had a respect for nature that's lost. We weren't just going out grabbing and stealing and killing and destroying because we want more money. I mean, were we paying for it? Did we have electric bills? Because we had to harness what was given freely from the creator, the sun, the water. Now you got to pay a water bill, you have to pay electric bill. All of this is free. We were growing our own food. Now you have to go to the store. Oh my gosh, the list goes on. Why? Because we've lost our culture. We grew food, like I told you. I've got a history of farmers. However, if you talk to brown melanated people, they don't necessarily want to do that. Why? The association with slavery. Well, we were picking cotton. I ain't gonna grow food and pick it now. The disconnect is it's funny, but it's for real.
Hmm.
Like that is what we did. But because they moved here and captured people and brought and it's like it's in the DNA. Like most of us know, but then that mindset from those who were truly enslaved, they still feel, well, we were slaves and we're not going to go out and pick any cotton in 2026 when we can go to the grocery store. Like that's the mindset. That's the connect
Hmm.
and the disconnect at the same time because we are people of the earth. We grew food. We put our hands in the ground. That was how we survived. And now, because we think we came here on slave ships from Africa, picking cotton all day and all night, we don't want to be associated with the thing which is truly who we are. Does that make sense? You
Oh,
hear
it
what I'm
makes
saying?
total sense. It makes
Yeah.
us, that's what makes us fruitful. I'm going to say this one thing and then we'll go over the soul work and wrap up. Because you reminded me, my brothers worked on the farm when I was growing up. So I'm not,
Mhm.
even at my age, I'm not disconnected from that. They would bring
Mhm.
home corn, watermelon, squash, everything.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, I need to do this history because you're inspiring me even more. Intuitively, the farm where they worked is called Castle Farm. I
Mhm.
really believe that was my ancestors' land. And let me tell you why. Because my grandmother worked for that family. They're called the Gregories in New Kent County, Virginia. And then my older brother worked for them. And then my youngest brother worked for them. But there was some distinct connection. Like, why is that family connected? And just me knowing what I know, I was like, I feel like they bought the land from them. Because I can tell you for sure, I know our church bought the land from my family. So that tells you how much land my family had.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
So
And how
we
could you
know.
just be slaves and then 5 minutes later you got 100 acres?
Don't make no sense. Because the church was built, Verlyn, in 1870. So, but the land was already there before 1870. So what was we doing for church before? Just to talk about what you were talking about, churches and nature. Okay, let me review the soul work and then because I do this on every episode, I give people homework, which I call soul work.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, and this is based on stuff you mentioned. If you have something to add at the end of the list, feel free. So, number one, meet your extended family. Do the tree. Ask your parents or your grandparents. Number two, write down your oral history. Trust the oral tradition. Number three, locate the documents. It's in the US Census. It could be marriage records, death certificates, all of this stuff. Look at ancestry.com. Number four, question the identity you received from school. Anything else?
And in addition to talking to your parents or grandparents, if you have whoever your oldest relatives are, auntie, Uncle Bobo and them, anybody who is the oldest, because sometimes our parents are not the oldest. So find your oldest living relative and ask lots of questions. And other places you can check the National Archives. I have not been there yet, but I know I bought a book about how to go back. And there are books, I didn't think to have it near me, but there are books that can tell you how to trace it without swabbing anything. But National Archives and also some of the libraries that belong to Mormons. I don't remember the
Mm,
Library of the Mormons. I don't know how they got some of the documents, but I hear that that's a place to start. And they're kind of around different places. It's not like one, but definitely the National Archives
very
and
good.
old newspapers, which a lot of those can be found in the archives as well. Old newspapers. Because a lot of the libraries, from what I understand, were destroyed, so none of this could be traced back. But the one thing they didn't do is find all the newspapers and articles and documents that were stored other places other than the library.
Correct. Yeah, y'all got enough to go on. And Verlyn, where can people find you? Because, of course, you got your Before You Do podcast. You're an author. You got a
Mhm.
lot of stuff happening.
I'm on YouTube at Before You Do with Verlyn. The easiest way is to go to my website, which is verlyn.com, VerlynTarlton.com, VerlynTarlton.com. And that has my YouTube and all of that.
Okay, perfect. Y'all know where to reach Verlyn. It is verlyntarlton.com. Remember, your soul is calling you for greatness. You are a soldier. You are ready for war. We will see you next time. Goodbye.